Hello, everyone, and welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. I'm Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined today by Harold Muliati. He's going to be running the video switcher as well as co-hosting. The Lady Lesley is not with us today, and you may be wondering why. It's her birthday. So, we have a little something for her. Harold? Happy birthday to you, Miss Learn-Appeal. Happy birthday to you, dear Miss Learn-Appeal. Happy birthday, dear Miss Learn-Appeal. Happy birthday to you. You're not getting older, you're getting better. That's what they say. We'll see you next week. Actually, we'll see you tomorrow. And we have a great guest today, a good friend, a lovely man. He's a gorgeous man. But unfortunately, I haven't seen him in 4 years. We're just talking pre-show. It's been ages. We're 1 hour from each other. We never see each other. It's just so sad. This is LA living. This happens all the time in Los Angeles. But we've got with us Dr. Ray Jimenez. He's doing great stuff in the industry. He's got a seminar, webinar coming out on workflow learning, which is really interesting. And if you're not following him, follow him. He's got some great content he puts out. And he'll be joining us in a moment. Here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation at www.relate.com, your training and video partner. And there in that center position of power, that lovely human being known as Dr. Ray Jimenez. How are you, Ray?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me here, Rick and Harold. Appreciate being here. Thank you.
Oh, we appreciate you here, and you know you're always welcome. Ray, it's been a while since we've seen each other in person, but we do keep in touch through shows and pushing each other on content. But you're doing some great new stuff with the workflow learning. A lot of people are going, "What's workflow learning?" And I think you've done some great little kind of mini podcasts, micro podcasts, explaining what it is and how it can be used. And I love the approach. It's kind of like business systems analysis, a business analysis, but for learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the focus on content is a good value for the organization. Mm-hmm. But when things are moving really very fast and that things are changing rapidly, and even more importantly, there's just so much technology, then the push right now is to figure out the way, how do we really shorten the learning process? And the only one way to do that is to learn while doing work. Mm-hmm. And which we go back to the very essence of how people learn anyway. We learn by doing work. And that's the essence of workflow learning. Now, there's a lot of misconception because workflow learning sometimes is defined as performance support, moments of needs, or micro-learning. Those are great solutions, but they are still geared at providing answers. In workflow learning, my humble observation and research tells me that the workers are already learning. We have to recognize that and optimize what they do at work. That way, we are depending on them in a lot of learning processes.
Yep, that makes sense. And you know, you're right, because when people start a job, it's rare that they get months and months of training ahead of time. They pretty much get sat down and say, okay, do something. And they teach them little things. And sometimes there are companies that will spend 1 to 3 weeks getting people up to speed. But those are the really large ones usually. The mid-sized companies usually can't afford that. They bring you in and just say, start working. And so the concept of workflow learning, as you've been talking about, it makes sense because it just refines more that process of learning, but yet still keeps you involved.
Right. Yeah, and I think the core, and you'll remember through the years, I've always talked about story. I've always talked about experience. I've always talked about scenario. And that's really the maturing process of my learning, because I'm always learning, is that the best way for people to learn is to pick out work situations that matters to them. Mm-hmm. Not a scenario, not a hypothetical situation, but work. So they look at the work and then they analyze it, they find solution to it, And then they also can report an impact on their solutions to the problem. It's a very short one. So that's the crux, in my understanding and my research and my work right now on situation expert using the product that we have launched, and also workflow learning. So that's the core of it, Rick.
Right, and the product situation expert. You talked about that, I think, the last time you were here, and it's really fascinating how you're approaching that. How's that being received, and what kind of feedback are you getting on it?
Well, the interesting thing is that many of our colleagues in the learning world are still thinking about, oh, can I put in my content? Oh, can I still do quickly the support tool? Uh, when they have a mindset such as that, what happens is that they're not understanding that the worker is changing. So in situation expert, most of the people who work at are actually operations people. There's a company in maintenance of engine that we work with. There's a company that they're in airline, but we're talking about the logistics people. Very rarely do we have a relationship with L&D, because L&D are somehow focused with content and software and authoring and LMSs. They're very far away from work has got to be fixed.
Right.
And our approach has been like, let's look at the work and fix and learn it from along the way.
Yeah, you and I have always agreed on that really it's about ops, because that's what runs companies. Yeah, the other departments are nice, they're fluffy sometimes, but the ones running the nuts and bolts of a company tend to be the operations folks, and they have probably the most training needs.
Yeah, exactly. One of the most interesting situations that maybe 8 out of 10 people who's doing training and learning have very little opportunity to go down to operations, which is kind of a sad way. And no matter how much we try to train them to think of ops, since they have never been in ops, it's hard for them to understand profit, loss, wastage, reduction of time, turnover, breakdown. They look at that from a very idealistic point of view. So in workflow learning, what we're trying to invite our clients is to really look at how the workers are doing work, and then use that as the opportunity to learn. For example, when you're looking at a problem like a tractor, there might be 3 or 4 engineers who's trying to solve the problem of trying to refurbish 10 tractors. So they get together and they solve the problem, and they find some analysis and different solutions to that problem, and along the way they're learning. So one of my friends from NASA has talked to me about this. It's very interesting. When he saw a situation expert and workflow learning, he was telling me, so Ray, it's like you're learning without knowing that you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is the essence of learning, because if doing learning separate from work, it loses. We already know this, Rick. You lose so much of what you learn formally just because it's not close to the real world situation.
Well, it is funny, when you bring that example up, it's sort of like when you're teaching kids about mathematics and they go, oh, I hate math. And you say something like, well, when you go to the store and you give somebody money, how do you know what you're supposed to get back? Well, because I know if I gave them $1 and it was 50 cents, I get 50 cents back. I go, that's math. It's like, I was doing math. You do math. Without it, you would be broke. So.
Exactly. And that essentially is it. There's a very good illustration that's exactly what it is. The only thing that is difficult for our colleagues is that when it is not perfect, when it is not in a box, when it is not predictable, it's kind of scary, right? So I love this illustration. One of the persons that I work with in our own webcast talks about most training programs are designed for what you call happy incidents. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about the bad incidents, right? But in real life situation, most of the problems, most of the costs, most of the delays, most of the problems are related with unhappy incidents.
Right.
So in workflow situations, we want the learners and the workers to really look at issues that causes breakdown, issues that reduces their downtime, and address them, because then they can put in their knowledge, if they have the knowledge, and put it to fix that particular problem. Or more often than not, it's very interesting, they have the knowledge, And one of the things that we espouse in workflow learning is this: the worker is figuring it out. Workers can actually do the job with even minimal training in many, many conditions. And that's an interesting thing, because when I shift my thinking about, oh wow, they can really figure them out. So what do we do for them? Then we need to respect them, the way they learn at work, because that's really the starting point of how we can help them.
And would you say, Ray, that we don't give people enough chances to make mistakes?
Yes, absolutely, and you hit it on the nail. And I think that in making mistakes, we emphasize a lot of the cost to it, the uncertainty to it. But making mistakes is a necessary process for anybody
Yeah.
to really understand an idea within the context of a setting. Because if you, even if you have 1, 2, 3 steps, whatever, no matter how perfect that is, you still have to apply 1, 2, 3 steps in a situation. You're like, okay, I bought this wrench. You just bought a wrench. When you open up the wrench and you apply it with a tool, that process of applying it in the tool sets the context. I don't care how perfect the answer is. And that's why risks is, and we talk about risk in trial and error. Trial and error is not a negative thing. It is, in fact, inherent in learning. Without trial and error, there's no application.
Yeah. And it is interesting because people in a lot of companies just want it to be perfect. But we don't learn that way. And if you put pressure on somebody to be perfect, they'll probably make more mistakes than not. And, mistakes are important. I think we do learn from mistakes. And now, if, obviously if we make the same mistakes over and over and over and over again, there's got to be some sort of remediation. But on the whole, most companies are fairly tolerant of mistakes to a point. And
Right.
and of course, there's some industries where mistakes can be very critical to life or something else. So we want to minimize, like in medical or something like that, you want to minimize the amount of mistakes. But that's why they have some simulations and other things to see if they can do an operation correctly without making mistakes. It's not quite the same as a real operation, but at least to get familiar with what could go wrong.
Yeah. Well, what is interesting thing is that as you have experience through a lot of these things, the more complex the job is, the more the job is actually shared with people.
Mm-hmm.
Give you a good example. I'd like to credit this to Melissa Duarte, who's one of my mentors in my workshop. She says that if there's a compliance issue and the person is new, something goes on at work, which means like the new person will say, I don't really know how to do this. And the more experienced person would say, just do what you can and let me know so I can help you out with the things that you cannot do. An interesting example, because that's the way actually people help each other at work. But if you remove that reality from training, then suddenly we say, how are they going to survive? But in reality, they do survive. They do find ways to do that. Another great example in that area is like, somebody keeps on arguing with me, well, the surgeon needs to have a perfect job. Do you know that most surgeons and even pilots, they have co-pilots.
Mm-hmm.
In surgeons, they have co-surgeons. Why? Because the job is so delicate, they need to have somebody to check them out. But if you remove that from the computation of your design, because we don't focus on the workflow itself, not understanding that, then we insist on a design as if all can be answered in a content program.
Now, you brought up something that's interesting. For example, in the workflow learning model, you brought up the thing about the co-pilot or the co-surgeon or the team that does something. Would you say that communication is a very critical part of workflow learning?
Right. In fact, that's one of the crook and the challenge. In my research, what I've discovered is this. A lot of people have been talking about collaboration, sharing experiences, sharing knowledge. It becomes suddenly limited because we say only the subject matter expert can actually help, or only the experienced person can help. What I discovered, number one, many of the workers, even if they have good experiences, have difficulty articulating their experience. I mean, they're smart people, but they cannot articulate it. Secondly, we don't redefine expertise or subject matter expertise. there is what you call practical experience that must be allowed to surface. So in the process of communication, which is very, very valuable, as you have mentioned, something goes on between this that I have a company right now who's asking me to do a project for them in order to help their workers and their staff members to have what you call intellectually curious. And I said, okay, what do you mean by intellectually curious? Oh, we want them to discover, we want them to contribute, to participate. I said, the problem with intellectually curious as a theme is that it's only a medium to something. If they don't have a work process that they agree on, they will not be encouraging each other. So communication must be understood in the context of not just communicating per se, but what is the nature of the communication and how do we encourage people to contribute even with the small practical experiences that they have.
Good point. Good point. Now, you said you were going to share some stuff. Did you want to share anything at this point?
Yeah, show you a couple of slides in here in Situation Expert. And you can probably see this on the screen. So what we have done in Situation Expert, it can happen either through a leadership program, a small video here. It can be a video through your cell phone, or by the way, this is a call center. It could be a video of a tractor developer. So we ask the worker or the trainer, whoever, to present it. And then what they do is to invite other people to join with them. And then they do what you call instant thinking. They sort of think what comes to their mind in terms of their intuition, what is their gut feel. So then they share that if it's a collaboration process. And then we ask them to do an analysis. We ask them as an example in here, you have here the fishbone. So they analyze the problem. So help them with the tools. Because my research have shown that a lot of people, no matter how sophisticated they are, sometimes they forget to think through the process carefully, and therefore their decisions are biased. To improve that, you give them tools, and then you ask them to come up with solutions. It might be a checklist, etc. and the like. Now, you begin to see here that there are many tools that we provide in Situation Expert: Fishbone, Pareto laws, 80-20 rules, scenarios, mapping. They can map the information if you want them to map the information. And many of the tools, because what we discovered is that people approach this problem in different ways, and therefore there are different tools that can do that. So you have instant thinking, analysis, solutions, and then finally we ask them to report an impact. And this is really the interesting part here, Rick, because in many cases what happens with the impact is that many organizations have difficulty connecting impact to actual work. And the reason, in my own humble opinion, is that they're not dealing with work. If you're not dealing with work as a center point of your activity, you cannot go back to it and refer to it and see whether you impacted it. So if you're looking at tractors or you're looking at a call center number of drop-off calls, very quickly after going to an analysis, instant thinking solutions, they can report an impact. Did I save efficiency? Did I improve efficiency? So this is just an overview that I wanted to share with the group and be able to stop that in that area. So back to you right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And when they go into Situation Expert, how do they get started?
Well, what they do is either if you are a operations manager or even if you're an L&D person, you come in and create an account, and then you design how you want to approach it. If you want a team of 4 or 5 people, or even a department to say, hey, by the way, starting tomorrow, I'd like you to submit some of the issues that you have, and they submit the issues, and then everybody's invited to go through that process. Very, very organic, very formal. You still need somebody to champion it and lead it, but the intention is that it's organic. It can happen in any shape and form. There's no formal structure. The important thing is that you start with a situation, you do an instant thinking, you analyze, you help solve, and report the impact in your own small unit of grouping that can take advantage of that information. So that's simple
great.
as that. They go to the website, situationexpert.com, and they can create their own account or become a partner so we can help them out.
I think that's a great idea, and especially since you made it open so that you're not really tied to anything in particular. So so basically you can attack the problem any which way you see fit.
Yes, and that's the nature of things, because a group might have a problem and 5 people can get involved. Another one group might have a persistent small problem, but they have to monitor the problem over weeks or months. Then they might have a bigger group. So the structure is natural to the way work, and I'd like to emphasize that, because work is the natural place to learn.
Yeah.
It is not the classroom, or it's not online.
I like the idea.
Yes, sir.
I like the idea of impacts in there, because rather than having a problem that, once people fix it, then it just says fixed, then you have people's input on what did the fix actually do? Did it actually fix it to everyone's satisfaction? Is there possibly, it gets people thinking, is there actually some other solution that might actually fix it better and increase efficiency in a certain area where it really is needed more?
Right. You hit the mark there, because, by the way, workers already always check whether it's an impact, right? That's the nature of work. When they fix something, they have to check whether it's working or not. So it's very natural to say, oh, I've fixed this particular volume of work. It's very easy for them to say, oh, you know what, we saved 10 hours. Boop. Or, you know what, we saved this equipment. Boop. So it's an organic way of doing it. So we're not asking them to do something that they're not doing already, right? And thanks for catching that. And I think because it's small and it's real, it is easy to report those impacts. Now, in Situation Expert, we can aggregate those. In fact, one of our biggest clients right now came to us because they could not report the impact of their projects and their learning program. And when we showed them Situation Expert, they end up simply saying, it is as simple as this. Well, yeah, it is as simple as that if you start in the workflow. If you start with content, forget it. How can you relate back the impact? It's not relatable. There's no way, unless you ask for memorization checklist, which is not an impact, right? It's a different kind of metrics.
Yeah.
Now, can you use the tool to create or to refine processes? In other words, let's say there's a problem and they're not quite sure how to solve it, but they eventually come up with something. At that point, does that become a repeatable, for example,
Yes.
solution?
Right. Yeah, and exactly what happens here is that, and we're only discovering this in a gradual process because the software is relatively young for the past year and a half to 2 years. What we're discovering, and it's already in Situation Expert, is as you solve problems, it's amazing that people are actually cooperators. They're putting in the right solutions. And then people can go back later on and say, gee, how did problem ABC happen and what was the fix? They can go search and find the fix, and they can add more solutions to that. Now, it's an organic way of doing it, and it encourages. Now, my conclusion in this research has been this. There's a lot of technology. People say AI is coming in, all of this other technologies and tools, and the thinking process will always be needed. Whether we have a super duper AI system, the thinking process is still is important. So in workflow learning, my point of view is to emphasize, to give the learners the opportunity to think it through, because it is only by thinking it through that you collect from them their innovations, their suggestions, their practical experiences, because most of this breakthrough knowledge comes from people anyway. They don't come from nowhere. It comes from the very knowledge people that we already have in our work environment. So, Rick, thank you for bringing that up, because that's a natural trend. When you get to people to contribute ideas, you'll be able to identify, and we have a system that you can actually filter those. Like which one we call it deep smarts.
Okay.
Which one are the deep smarts? Which mean which ideas had been thought of seriously, with some validity and some real good thinking behind it. That way, if you have 1,000 ideas, maybe 20, 30, 14 of them will be classified as deep smarts.
That's good. Also, I see another benefit of this too. I was just thinking as you were talking, one of the biggest problems we have right now in industry is the brain drain. There's a lot of older people retiring. They have a lot of experience. How do you save that experience? This could be a tool that could help maybe save some of those experiences. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working right now with an architectural company. And when you mentioned that, I was laughing because what happened is that we talk about knowledge management for decades now.
Mhm.
Most knowledge management is a collection of data of somebody's opinion. And then we came up with the idea of the community, right? The problem with those is that it suddenly becomes a humongous, unorganic way of collecting information.
Yeah.
In situation expert, if you start with an incident, this is the criteria. If you start with a problem, then there's a discussion around the problem, and therefore it is easier to ask experienced people to contribute their knowledge because there's a problem. It is very hard to get somebody who's going to retire in 5 years and close them in a room and say, gee, you're retiring
Yeah.
in 5 years. You have to collect all your knowledge and put it in the database system. It doesn't work because what triggers are problems that the companies are doing. And if the company is not
Yep.
collecting those problems and the answers, then they could never collect the lost brain knowledge of
No.
people.
I think you would need a cattle prod for that, and it's just not very viable. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd like to just remind the group that I'm running a workshop on workflow learning, and I think it starts on end of September, September 25, 26, 27. So yeah, here you go, October 316, and there's one also coming up soon in operation. So this is now implementing workflow learning processes, not necessarily the software, but just the principles of how to apply it. And situation expert is only one. There are many workflow learning processes system right now evolving at work, and we will cover some of them as part of that workshop.
no, that
Or
sounds great. And if
even
you haven't,
only have Facebook or LinkedIn, or you have only Slammer, Yammer, and other things, how do you introduce workflow learning by using the very tool that you have, like SharePoint, right? Because they're all the same tools. They encourage some, they have some strengths, some limitations, but they can be your vehicle in order to accomplish workflow learning.
yeah, and if you haven't attended one of Ray's classes or seminars or webinars, don't miss out. He's actually a lot of fun in the classes, and he gets a lot out of people. I've heard you talk. You're a very engaging person, and it'll be a good learning experience, and it's practical. So I think you'll really enjoy yourself. It's well worth it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And one shameless plug, I have a book on workflow learning.
Oh, you did have one. Cool.
You can research it online, the Amazon, or you can search it at lulu.com.
Oh,
It's
Lulu.
all about my research over the past 3 years. Workflow learning is the title of the book. This is the only one so far in the marketplace. There you go. Thank you for that.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, not too many people are talking about workflow learning at this point, which is why when you started doing that, I thought it was really interesting. Again, it's not something really totally repackaged like a lot of stuff in the learning community. It really does apply business principles to training, to hands-on, and to other things to make things happen, which is a slightly different approach. Actually, it's a pretty different approach. And I like it because, like you said, it brings it out of the people themselves rather than they're constantly being spoon-fed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's a
I
big
like
difference.
Your analogy in terms of saying that it's really a business practice.
Yeah.
And I would rather prefer it to be that way. It is a business solution. It's another way of
Yeah.
looking at the bottom line of the company rather than being siloed as a learning and development tool.
Right, and a lot of times what happens with learning and development is I call it the wannabe professor syndrome. But that doesn't always apply in a business environment. And everybody's been through college, and when you get out, you go, good, I'm so glad I'm out. It's like, it has good, but it's very different from a working environment. Very, very different. Though there are some colleges that are very hands-on, not all of them are. And so getting solutions, and they do learn, depending on the majors, they do learn to work with people, but not always. So, that collaboration between people, and you've probably seen this, not all companies encourage the opinions of others. It's sort of like we've established our procedures and they won't change. Good luck, because the world changes every day. So I think it's great. What you're doing, I think, is absolutely great. So
It makes sense because especially in large organizations, I suppose the training and just getting the knowledge to workers that they need, it could take a long time to catch up to the point it needs to get to. Whereas workers themselves are actually finding out solutions to problems, and they might be putting them into use well before it actually comes out officially in training and that sort of thing. So giving them a outlet that's closer to the actual workflow, yeah, it could save a lot of time. It could save a lot of problems that could happen from this gap in time between the training actually being put into action and the problems happening. And I guess it just sort of complements things like story-based learning and simulations and that sort of thing, things that are trying to bring training out of the abstract and into the real, trying to bring it closer to the work that it's actually training for.
And Ray, it's sort of interesting, what you're talking about, we kind of do in here. For example, when we bring people in, we may bring them in for one particular job or task, and before they know it, like Harold, I said, Harold, have you ever done a show or been on a camera? No. Oh, good. You're about to.
Yeah.
And Harold's been great. He just jumped into it, started learning. He's playing with mixers. He's doing video switching. He's setting up the shows, stuff he's never done before.
Yeah,
and now it's like second nature.
Because this is now a new phenomenon in the workflow of what you call minimal staffing. Not because people want to eliminate people, but in the concept of optimizing people, multitasking, multi-help, multi-skills.
Yeah, it makes sense. I remember my very first job with Citibank, my first real job. And, my job was it was an international credit, and I was supposed to manage about $1 billion loan register. I had never done that before. But it was boring because all I did every day was manual. This is kind of before computers are really popular, shorter batch processes. I'm aging myself. But it was just boring. I felt I want to do other things. So I made it a point to go upstairs where the industrial engineers were because I wanted to learn what they were doing. That was more interesting than what I was doing. And that probably in the long run led to management and training and everything else because I wanted to look at the whole picture, not just my little portion of it. I was bored with my little portion. I figured that out in about a month. I go, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something else. I still did my portion, and I see that with young people all the time. Like, for example, with millennials, everybody says, oh, millennials are lazy, they're this, they're that. I don't agree. I think there's a lot of very smart millennials, and they're passionate, and they like to do things. They may learn a little bit differently, or they may do some things differently, but that doesn't mean they're no good. That just means they're a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely, and we are already seeing this in the workflow in a workplace right now, and so you could see that I want to just make sure that those who are in L&D and for some of us who help in content, there's a place for content. There's no doubt about that. However, we need to have a fresher look at it because we might be over investing into it and not looking at what really are the changes in the workplace. So by respecting what the workers are actually really figuring it out, and they can actually have solutions, it allows us the opportunity to revisit our assumptions in learning and design. So how do we make it flexible? How do we make it open? In fact, what Harold had mentioned earlier, how do you make it so that we can raise and celebrate those workers who have tremendous ideas to contribute? Because this is the reality of work anyway. People have talent and people can... That's why we hire them to begin with, right? For heaven's sake, let them work. Let them perform.
That's a good point. Well, Ray, as always, it's a pleasure seeing you, even though it's virtual at this moment. We got to get together. I'll see you at DevLearn. I'll see you at DevLearn when you're out there for sure. And do attend his webinar and seminars. They're really good. I think you'll enjoy yourself quite a bit. And Ray, again, a pleasure seeing you again and seeing all the work you're doing. And definitely don't, like I said in the beginning, follow Ray because he puts out a lot of good content and it won't hurt your head. It's good. There's a lot of gentle wisdom there, if you will. And it makes you think, which is good. Anything that makes you think is good.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick, for your kind words. And Harold, thank you. And I look forward to the next time we get together.
That sounds good.
Thanks.
We'll see you in October, if not sooner.
Yes.
And for all you people watching, the information for Dr. Ray will be below here, so you can go to his website or go look at Situation Expert. We'll have links to all of that so you can take a look. And we'll see you folks actually tomorrow. Today is September 11th. And tomorrow we've got another eLearnChat. We'll have Kevin Siegel on from Icon Logic. He's always fun. Ray, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Okay. Thanks.
And that's a wrap.